Welcome back, friendly neighbors and Spidey fanatics. Today we're going to look at the top 10 moments from 2008's spectacular Spider-Man TV show. This show is still being talked about to this day, and for good reason. It's one of the better Spider-Man animated shows that's been on the air. I can go on and on about this show for hours, but for now, let's just jump into the top 10 moments from this series. When Peter got his black suit, he knew it was alive, but what he didn't know is that it could take over his body and make him fight crime while he was asleep in the suit. Let me explain. The Sinister Six was fresh on the scene, and Spider-Man at first had a tough time beating them. During a night where Peter was passed out exhausted from a night as Spider-Man, Peter's police radio reported the Six in Times Square. The symbiote heard this and took over Peter's sleeping body and took off as Spider-Man. The Sinister Six consisted of Doc Ock, Rhino, Electro, Vulture, Sandman, and the Shocker. At first, Spider-Man was getting his butt whooped. Then the symbiote started to outsmart all of the villains and destroy them one at a time while keeping silent as a mouse. In the early episodes of Season 1, Peter and Harry struggle to find dates for Midtown High's fall formal. At first, Peter tries asking Betty Brant from the Daily Bugle, but Aunt May convinces Peter that she's too old for him. Aunt May instead introduces Peter to Mrs. Watson's niece, Mary Jane, who has a wonderful personality. Yikes. Turned off by this choice, Peter tries to run away until he opens the door and is smitten at first sight when he sees Mary Jane for the first time. Then Mary Jane gives the most iconic Mary Jane line ever said on screen.
Face it, Tiger. You just hit the jackpot.
Peter goes one-on-one with the Lizard, a very personal fight for him due to the Lizard being his mentor and teacher, Dr. Curt Connors. The fight drives both of them down into the sewers, and Peter tries his hardest to figure out how to stop the Lizard from terrorizing New York without hurting his friend. This fight shows just how dedicated Peter is to helping his friends and family stay safe. It's even a great story arc for Eddie Brock when he helps Spider-Man defeat the Lizard. Eddie even finds a friend in Spider-Man. It's just heartbreaking since we know what his fate is going to be. As Peter continues to wear the black suit more and more, it starts to change its personality and even change its look by getting rid of the web pattern and giving it the Venom logo. Peter even starts saying we instead of I, much like Venom would in the future. The symbiote changes Peter's personality, making him more closed off to his friends and ruthless with his enemies. Eventually, Peter goes to a church and bangs his body against the church bells to try and get rid of it. During this battle, we get an awesome animated segment of Peter battling the symbiote inside, fighting for control with the backing of all his friends and the good memories and motivations he has to keep being Spider-Man.
If I ever get my hands on that wall crawler,
This episode was interesting to watch as we see Venom crash through the Daily Bugle and expose Peter Parker as Spider-Man. Of course, the Daily Bugle wants to get at the truth, harassing Peter and interviewing his closest friends in very, very detailed ways. It shows how well Peter has kept his secret. However, some people were starting to question whether Peter really is Spider-Man or not, because at the end of the day, it kind of makes sense. By the end of the episode, Flash Thompson goes out of his way to prove that Peter is not Spider-Man by dressing up as Spider-Man himself and putting himself in harm's way in front of criminals to fool the paparazzi, which shows even more how far Flash Thompson has come from being Peter Parker's high school bully to his friend in such a short amount of time. Watching this fight, I can confidently say that Spider-Man Homecoming took inspiration from this fight. Spider-Man's epic fight with Mysterio makes Spider-Man trust in his spider sense throughout. Much like in the MCU, Peter's first encounter with Mysterio made him start questioning the reality of what's real and what's a trick. Spider-Man blindfolds himself with his webs and fights mysterious death traps and illusions, and eventually takes Mysterio down, no longer falling for his tricks anymore. Ever since the first episode, Liz has been Flash Thompson's girlfriend. When Peter gets assigned to tutor Liz, at first she ignores Peter, only wanting to be with the popular crowd. She wants to focus on herself. As the season goes on, Liz and Peter start to become a lot closer when Peter helps boost Liz's grades and actually treats her like a lady. Smooth, Peter. Eventually, Liz starts losing feelings for Flash as she realizes that Flash was really holding her back. At the time, Peter was struggling to find the words to express to Gwen Stacy about how he felt. However, on New Year's Eve, Liz stopped by at Peter's house and confessed her feelings for him and kissed him at midnight. Aww, how cute.
Back off! I just took down the Rhino. A pale guy in a suit doesn't stand.
For the first part of the season, the main villain was an unknown character called the Big Man, the big boss of crime who kept producing more and more supervillains for Spider-Man to fight, created by Oscorp. Spider-Man eventually figured out that the Big Man was Tombstone. Usually in the comics, Tombstone was a street thug or a two-bit criminal. In this show, it seems like he took the role of being New York's Kingpin. See what I did there? Anyway, Spider-Man confronts Tombstone in his office, and he lays Spider-Man down like an amateur and reveals to Spider-Man that he can't win. The more crime he fights, the more supervillains he'll make Oscorp create. So he offers Spider-Man a job to work for him, just to look the other way once in a while. Of course, Spider-Man refuses and declares war on Tombstone. When Eddie Brock first got the symbiote, Eddie and Peter were already on bad terms, but now, with the symbiote revealing Peter Parker's secret to Eddie, it drove Eddie to madness. From then on, his ultimate desire was to destroy Peter's life, along with a few bones in his body. And throughout Season 2, he almost accomplishes it. He kidnaps Gwen, mentally toys with Peter, exposes his secret to the world, and almost attacks Aunt May. The fight between the two Spider Warriors was an epic animation sequence to watch and admire. Eventually, Peter did defeat Venom, but it cost Eddie his sanity. In the final episode of Spectacular Spider-Man, Spider-Man faces off against the Green Goblin for the final time. He finally reveals that the Green Goblin was Norman Osborn all along, but Peter thought the Goblin was really Harry Osborn. These two had an all-out battle across New York City, hitting each other with every combo in their arsenal. Norman eventually revealed how much he led Spider-Man on by framing his own son to steer suspicion away from him. Eventually, Spider-Man caught one of the Green Goblin's pumpkin bombs and webbed it to Norman's glider, and it exploded, causing him to crash into a water tank filled with thousands of pumpkin bombs, supposedly killing him. Why do I say supposedly? Well, watch the show for yourself and find out. Well, there you go, our top 10 moments from the Spectacular Spider-Man TV show. Now we want to hear from you. What moments from that show did you like the best? What Spider-Man show is your favorite? Let us know in the comments and maybe we'll do a top 10 moments from that one. In the meantime, subscribe, hit the button, and turn on notifications so you're the first to see it every time we put up a new video for Spider-Man fans here on the Spider-Man Fan channel. Now I'm just going to fall backwards off of this building and swing into the night. Whoop! Yeah.